Welcome to America's Commercial Real Estate Show, your source for market intel, forecast, and strategies. Hello, I'm Michael Bull. Thank you for being with us. Our show today is brought to you by my company, Bull Realty. We have teams and brokers in every specialty, but if you have office buildings or you want to sell or lease office buildings, or mainly sell them, if you want to buy them, you want to provide equity, you want to provide debt, or you're a lender, you'd like to get some loans paid off on office properties, or you're an ownership group and you'd like to sell some office properties and you want some communication with your lender to help a process go well, please call me directly. I sell office buildings, and my email is an easy one. It's michael@bullrealty.com. Well, and today our topic is somewhat related to office buildings, I would say. One of the things that has been prevalent since the pandemic is the work from home or the work from anywhere, and we've seen that kind of slowly changing, I guess, with some companies asking their employees to come back 3 days, some 4, some 5 days a week. We've also seen some of the buildings and some of the companies kind of make their offices more enticing and a place where people want to go. Well, one of the companies that does a great job of tracking the traffic that goes in and out of these buildings is Placer, Placer.ai. Please welcome my guest. It's Ethan Chernofsky, and he is with Placer.ai, and he's joining us on video. Ethan, thanks for being with us, sir.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And let's just start with put this in perspective. As I mentioned in the opening, it seems like I'm seeing more traffic. I sell buildings. I see more people in the buildings. I sell government buildings. I've seen the government asking some of those folks to come back 5 days a week. What are you actually seeing, though, when you look at kind of office building traffic compared to, say, pre-pandemic?
So I think when we look at that pre-pandemic period, we're still seeing things down quite considerably compared to where they were pre-pandemic. So you're talking about in the range of 30% less. In some cities that's much smaller, like so New York is leading the way. In others, it's much kind of further away than what it was. So San Francisco is further behind than others. But in the cities we see, it's still this fairly similar trend, right? Obviously some closer, some further away from where they were, but a pretty kind of steady recovery, though things do seem to have plateaued more in the last 6 months to a year, giving us this sense that this period right now might be pretty close to what the new normal looks like.
So when you trend that, though, it's continuing to trend to more office activity from employees?
So, yes, I'd say we're still seeing that trend continue. Mm-hmm. I think when you look nationwide, that's driven heavily by the cities that are still lagging further behind. So New York, you are seeing at some points levels where it's like 80, 90% of what it was. And so some of these cities are pretty darn recovered. For others are much further behind and are still kind of seeing that trending up at a more substantial rate. And so I think from a nationwide perspective, we do see that trend. Some cities, again, though, are far more recovered than others.
Yeah, that's interesting. So your expectations in moving forward, are we maybe sort of flatlining or just slightly increasing over time?
So I think we're going to see in the cities that are more established, I think we're going to see, fluctuations, but I think this is a good indication of where we're at. Mm-hmm. In cities that have a longer way to go, I think there will see a continued surge. But I do think that, when we look back at the pandemic and we say, what is the most significant shift that was a direct result of the pandemic that has lasted to today and will likely last in the 5, 10 plus years to come? I do think hybrid work is among them. So I don't think we're ever going back to 100% of what things were. I just think the real question is, does that matter? So if people are coming back 3, 4 days a week, is that enough? And in fact, is that an ideal balance that kind of creates this good situation for office, good situation for employers, but better than it was pre-pandemic situation for employees as well? And that might be an amazing win-win.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I came up with the ultimate solution of this a year or two ago on my show. I'm like, all right, look, if a lot of employees want to work from home all the time, and if the employer wants them at the office all the time, let's just compromise. Let's just do a 4-day week. Let's let employees that want to work 4 days a week work 4 days a week, or work 3 days a week, and get paid for the time you want to work. I don't know. What are you seeing for like Monday and Friday traffic compared to the other days?
So, I mean, I think Monday and Friday is interesting for two reasons. One, I think it deepens your point of like, what are we really looking for, and what's the ideal scenario for everyone involved. But two, why we think this trend has such staying power because of how rational it is, even in its details. So what we're currently seeing is that Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, when we look at the proportion of weekly visits, have grown since the pandemic. So pre-pandemic, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday were a certain percentage of visitation. They're now more, which tells us that when people come to the office, they are far more likely to do it on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Mondays and Fridays have decreased as their proportion of weekday visits, which tells us that they are less significant than they were. Now, Friday was always kind of if you're going to take a half day, that's the day to do it. Mm-hmm. But Monday's really interesting because I think it shows us a few things. First, it shows us that people want balance in the places where it brings the most value. So let's think about why Mondays and Fridays, and that it extends our weekends. It gives us more flexibility in that, we're going to go away to this place for a long weekend. If I only need to be back, on late, Sunday night, all of a sudden waking up later on Monday morning, kicking off my day and not feeling that need to rush into the office, that can be a significant advantage. Friday, obviously the same. It's getting into that weekend faster. I think this is the really important takeaway when you look at the data, is that it's not random. Consumers are clearly, or people are clearly making choices that enhance their work-life balance. And so if this can be sustained, like if this balance can be found, like you said, whether it's 3-4 days a week, there is this potential for a much happier, more satisfied employee who's able to find this balanced situation that they couldn't find pre-pandemic.
Yeah, that's a good point. And it seems like since the pandemic, people have really gravitated toward that balance being not working. It's like, it seems like even the most motivated folks out there that just really like to work a lot, even them, it seems like people have gotten, hey, let's slow down a little bit. Let's enjoy life a little bit more.
So I think it's, interestingly enough, I think it's less about less work and more about the amount of effort it takes to get to work.
Yeah,
and
the commute.
Again, wow. It's what are the trade-offs? So let's take a kind of silly example that I think illustrates the point well. If you normally work Monday through Friday from the office and each commute in is 45 minutes to an hour, and that's a significant amount of time. Let's remove one of those days. Let's say you now don't go into the office on Tuesdays. You're there Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Tuesday morning at 8 o'clock, instead of commuting in, you go to the grocery store. That's the big change you've made. You go to the grocery store from 8 to 9. You have a little bit more time, a little less pressure. You're focused on your list a little bit more. You're working from home that day, so that's the day, you know what, I'm going to cook dinner for the family because I can pop out in my lunch break and, prep things up and be ready, and at 5 I can start cooking. That can be a significant life change because it doesn't just allow you to do things you couldn't do before, allow you to cut out the commute, allow you to do that grocery shop in a more leisurely way. But all of a sudden, that hour that you were spending either in the evening or on the weekends in the grocery store, you've earned that hour back. Mm-hmm. So it's a force multiplier from a life perspective in the sense that it gives us back significant amounts of time to do things we want to do. And this is where we say, like, yes, there is this impact on the office visitation and what happens to those surrounding areas. But there is a unique opportunity in the places that are centered around residential to create a better retail, restaurant, experiences-oriented situation because all of a sudden there's more time to be spent.
Yeah, that's a good point. I have a home that's in the rush hour, might be an hour from my office. And then I have a place in town that's 2 blocks from my office. And when I when I did that, when I'm there, it's like, all right, now I have time to work out every morning and exercise, and I feel really way better than sitting in traffic and maybe being frustrated when I get to the office.
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head, right? These are the changes that are significant here. It's not. I think there was at the beginning there was this notion that it was like employees are never going to come back to the office. The office has lost all value and purpose, and that was clearly silly, right? It was too far. And I think the opposite notion that like you must be in the office 5 days a week in order to be productive, I think that was equally kind of like, we were able to pull back the curtain and show that that wasn't necessarily the truth either. Now, there are some businesses that are going to choose that route, and that's totally within their rights. But I think the ability to have that balance is really significant. And I think for most people, or for many people, I'd say, it probably produces better work because there's certain things that you do better when you don't have distractions around you. And there's certain things that you simply can't replace the collaboration and engagement that comes from being in one space with your colleagues. And so I think what excites us, and the reason, again, from a data perspective, the trend looks very, very steady. And from a rationale perspective, the concept seems having to have super significant degrees of longevity, and that when the data and the story really line up, it's hard to see why that would disappear.
Yeah, makes sense. Now, Ethan, you guys track traffic not just on office buildings, but on all kinds of properties, including retail and restaurants and things. So, how has these shifts and these patterns impacted the businesses, say, in suburban versus in the central business districts?
So I think there's a few ways, and it's super fascinating because we think about this one significant shift and then all of the ripple effects. So think about suburban grocery. They're seeing visits at different hours than they were. And it's not huge changes, but it's small but significant shifts. The local coffee shop that sits in a suburban area is seeing more traffic on a 3 p.m. on a Monday than they were pre-pandemic. So there's these kind of very direct impacts. The gym that you're talking about that's near these areas is seeing more activity. But then there's also this really interesting thing, because when we think about what hybrid work means, it means that certain people who are married to living in close proximity to an urban area because that was where their office was, because they had to go there 5 days a week, now only need to go there 3 days a week. And so the decision to live in closer to that urban area or further away, more into the suburbs, that kind of calculus changes. And now they've moved. And when they moved, they went from a smaller place to a slightly larger place, to a place where the cost of living was higher, to a place where the cost of living was lower. And so now they have more money to spend, more space to fill, and they still have this desire to have some of the experiences like they had when they were living in that urban area. So you have these really interesting things happening in the suburbs where a consumer that has first-time demand to fill that space, has money to spend, and is looking for things that are new. So we've heard so much about retailers that are moving to suburban areas, or retailers or dining players that have more strength in suburban areas than they've been seeing in urban areas, and much of that has to do with this consumer that is now operating in this area. So something like the pandemic changed the way we work, which changed where we need to live, which changes the way we shop and eat out, and it changes what we need to shop for. And so those ripple effects are really significant, and we're already seeing the impact. We've already seen the impact in the last few years. And I think for many retailers and for many shopping centers, it's only the beginning, because we're seeing these shopping centers orient themselves more to a higher end retailer than they might have previously even considered, because that retailer didn't fit in the suburban environment, or a dining concept that's more urban-esque that now really works in a downtown area that's more suburban. These are exciting changes that kind of rejig the way we think about what belongs in certain settings that might not have belonged before, but now makes a ton of sense.
Yeah, that's a good point to keep that in mind and look at those demographics. And Ethan, when you look at the downtown office districts where there's a lot of office, and I know a lot of the retail and restaurants really suffered during the pandemic. And then what have you seen trend wise there? Some of those businesses coming back more traffic?
So yeah, I think again, that return to office was really significant. I think a lot of these areas also have really strong residential components. And so the return there, or the kind of trade-off of audiences, those who left the city versus those who are now going to come into these urban areas, brought a lot of value. But I do think for many, the damage was really significant and they never came back from it. For others, they were able to adapt. The question is always, what is the actual net change from the reduction in visits? So if you went to the office 5 days a week pre-pandemic, were you eating out every day for lunch? Or were some days you packing a lunch, grabbing something quick on your way out?
Skipping.
And now that you're going in 3 days a week, how much did it really change the net total of your consumption in that area? And so I think that sometimes the exaggeration of what a trend's impact will be comes from a lack of taking numbers within context, right? Mm-hmm. And so the classic example of this is, e-commerce growth. If you saw it's 10% year over year, oh my God, eventually, very soon, physical retail isn't going to exist anymore. And that led to the clearly nonsensical retail apocalypse narrative. I think here too, there was this idea of like, people have left the office, they're never going to come back ever again, and therefore everything around it is going to suffer. Whereas the reality is new equilibriums were found, and there are changes, and those changes have significant ramifications, and they drive significant opportunities. But it's not the world looked one way and now it looks completely 180 degrees different. And I think it's always important to understand that we are still operating within a range that was quote unquote normal.
Right. Now you're on this video and this call. If you're listening to us on a podcast from Tel Aviv, you guys track this kind of traffic all over the world. How is back to work comparing in the U.S. compared to some other countries?
So interestingly enough, our data is U.S. only. So we are only seeing this in the U.S. But I think the interesting things that we're seeing, at least anecdotally, is that most countries, when you look at shopping behavior, work behavior, traveling behavior, vacations, all of those kind of normal part of life patterns went through a very similar cycle. Abrupt change because of the pandemic, slow recovery, and then speed recovery. And things look, in most parts of the world, very similar to the way they did before. Now again, one of the things that we emphasize heavily is this idea of a small but significant change. It doesn't, if I go from working 5 days a week from the office to 4 days a week from the office, again, that doesn't take away the value of the office. But it is a significant change that creates lots and lots of opportunity, whether it be in suburban or urban environments. Again, you own a cafe in the suburbs, and you had a certain set of problems pre-pandemic. Post-pandemic, some of those problems are in a better situation because people are working from home more. So the opportunity to draw someone out of their house and how to have them work out of your comfortable couches and order a coffee and a scone or whatever suits your fancy at that time of day has increased because there's more people in the area, in the vicinity. And so for every one of these changes, it doesn't have to be a sea change. It doesn't have to be things looked one way and now they look completely different to create significant opportunity in all the environments. And that's, I think, the thing that we really need to focus on, which is change creates opportunity. And here, like in so many other spaces from the pandemic, the change took place. There are these ripple effects, and you're seeing lots of businesses really lean in to those opportunities and driving success off of them.
Yeah. And you mentioned, Ethan, that New York's back to work is doing better than San Francisco, not as well. Are there any other cities that kind of jump out to you?
Yeah, we see trends that are around weather. So when it's warmer, we see that people tend to come back to the office more, which again makes sense. It's difficult to leave the house when it's cold and rainy. Though I guess New York does stand out a little bit there. But cities like Boston or Chicago can fluctuate more just because of the nature of what those cities will cope with. I think the sectors that make up a lot of the buildings that we look at can really matter. So finance is a sector that's going to drive people back to work more. High tech is a sector that's probably going to drive people back to work a little bit less. And so it's these combination of factors Where's the commute long? One of the interesting things is we see commutes, the distance travel decrease, meaning if I live close to the office, I go back to the office more. If I live further away, I go back to the office less. What correlates with that? Family size, the likelihood that I have kids. These are, again, rational factors. If I have to commute in an hour in the morning, an hour in the night, I have to figure out childcare. I get to see my family less. So I think all these things play in to this very rational decision on the part of the employee that's saying, I want a greater degree of flexibility, not because I don't value the office. I do value the office, but because I can gain benefits that make it better for me to have this, my office time, and then the time that I can work from home.
Yeah, I like the perspective and kind of looking at it in a broad view and how it impacts demographics and real estate all around us. And one of the things that that brings to mind is the residential homes and multifamily, right, and how that's adjusted.
Yeah, I think there's areas that to me still seem like huge opportunities, and I might be completely wrong, but this, for my untrained eye, seem really exciting. The idea of co-working as like this hub and spoke model seems really interesting, especially for businesses that want to have fewer large offices now. I think that's a really interesting concept. The idea of these rising markets. One of the things that we've learned is that you don't need to be exactly where this hub is. Proximity is less critical than it was in the past. And so I think the idea of where can I find people who can have a high quality of life? Where can I find these areas where there's really talented individuals, but less business saturation? So these rising areas, I mean, Austin, Texas was all the rage. Tampa, Florida was talked about ad nauseum. Phoenix, Raleigh, North Carolina. I think these rising regions of the country are super fascinating when you think about what happens if that investment continues to take place, and what happens if businesses are more open-minded to the idea that I don't need to just be in certain business areas. I can be more open to where I go and potentially even find a better balance for my business, find better employees, and give those employees a better life balance and a better life situation, which will make them more likely to stay. So I think there's so many times within this situation, you would be told about the negatives of it. People aren't going to the office as much. True. And that does have a negative, ramifications, like we said, on those local restaurants or businesses that were built around that lunch traffic. But there's also so much opportunity that comes from it. And it's on a kind of regional level. It can be nationwide. It can be suburb versus urban. So I think it's really incumbent on every business to ask, okay, what pain did this cause us? How significant is that challenge? But at the same time, what are the opportunities that we can now lean into to make us more efficient, more effective, more profitable, more revenue generating, whatever it may be?
Yeah. Ethan, what do you see for trends demographic wise for the age of employees that may be coming back to the office more or coming back to the office and working from home more?
So I think the working from home more, from what we see, tends to be over-oriented towards a little bit more likely to have a family and a little bit less likely to live in close proximity to the office. So it tends to be like a younger audience. So younger audiences are going back to the office more, right? That's, by the way, a very good thing, right? One of the big things about the office is the ability to take a younger employee and teach them the ropes and get them kind of ingrained in a professional culture. It's very, very effective. The idea that distance or the likelihood that I have a family has an impact on my willingness to go to the office more or less is really significant, because it's another indicator of the rational thinking that's going into this decision. And I think this is so important because, again, there's these overly simplistic notions that get tossed out when something like this happens. So let's even think, you talked about fitness at the beginning. When we were at the height of the pandemic, the conversation was essentially, why would anyone ever go to the gym again? The gym is stupid. You're around other people. They're smelly. They're sweating. Why would you ever want to do that? Everyone's going to use a Peloton. No one's ever going to go to the gym again. Mm-hmm. And not only was that not true, it was the opposite of the truth. Like the recovery of the gym was incredibly strong, and Peloton faced struggles shortly thereafter. I think the same thing is true for the office. There was this idea that people aren't going back to the office, and that means they hate the office. The office is dying. I don't think we have seen a shred of evidence that's true on like a large scale. Instead, what we've seen is people making a very rational choice that says, if I live an hour away and I can gain back 2 to 4 hours a week by not commuting, I can gain back more time with my family, more time to invest in the things that really matter to me. That's a very positive thing. And I think understanding that we're rarely living in the extremes and we're often seeing people behave in a way that looks to identify an ideal equilibrium is really important to understanding which trends are likely to stay, which trends are likely flash in the pan, and which have that kind of real power to not just land, but then create these ongoing ripple effects.
Oh, good point. We don't want to just look at a short period of time, right, and make a decision we think is forever. What about, Ethan, commute times? It seems like there's a reason why commute times may have reduced, or people wanted to be back to the office or closer to the office potentially. But I guess commute times, are they actually longer when they commute because of the ability to work from home in the past more, or even now some?
So for many, there's a greater distance, right? I live further away. And I think this is one of the things that we talked about a lot when at the height of the pandemic was we thought about the shift in migration patterns. So more people moving. One of the really important data points, and quoting a friend of mine from Brett Swango from Colliers, who does workforce analytics there, the cost of moving to a new state outweighs the savings of the average American family. So it's not so easy to do. Most people were not moving from New York to Florida, Chicago to Phoenix, San Francisco to Austin. Most people were moving a degree of separation away, which is from the urban area into the suburbs a little bit further out. And it was that pursuit of better quality of life. And I think if I only need to go in 3 days a week as opposed to 5, that quality of life calculus changes. And all of a sudden I can have the slightly larger home, the backyard that I've always wanted for my kids, while still maintaining the city, that urban area. The office is the center of orbit. And I think what's happened is just an extension of what that orbit looks like, as opposed to a change in the pull and that center of gravity that offices have.
Yeah. So how much do you think the average commute time to folks has increased? I guess that's what you're saying, right? It's people.
I think for some it has. I think for many it's decreased, because let's take one of the important things about the shift in where people lived. If you had an older millennial who was living in New York City, 35 years old, he's got a kid, he's got the second on the way, they're living in a 2-bedroom apartment, and they move to the suburbs, what happens to that apartment? It didn't sit vacant. Mm-hmm. There was an amazing data point from a company, and I'm forgetting their name, and I'm so apologies for forgetting the name. I think it was Urban Digs, that showed that rents were up and rent costs were down. And there was this indication that it was younger audiences that were moving in to fill these spaces. So it could be that this audience that had to commute from Hoboken now was able to find a place in the city, even though someone else moved out, and they're coming to their work more often. They don't have a family yet. They feel more free to come to the office. They like the drink after work, or the ability to hang out with colleagues. So all of these things can change. The dynamic is not that simple. So for some, it's certainly gotten longer, even if they're coming in less often. For others, it's gotten closer. Like, I've been able to move closer to the office, and many of those are high frequency visitors who are coming to the office more regularly.
Yeah. Well, Ethan, what would you leave our audience with to think about related to traffic in these office buildings?
I would say that there's 2 things to have a finger on the pulse of. One, we're going to see a continued bump, but that's going to be triggered heavily by the continued recovery in areas that have been lagging behind, like San Francisco. So it's like, ooh, the office is continuing. But in a lot of cities, this is the new normal. That's one. 2, we need to kind of find some way of using this as just the latest example of a use case to remind us not to over-orient to the extremes when something happens. When the offices were shut down, that's it, we're never going back to the office. That was not the case. Our consistent willingness to revert to the norm is really significant. And that doesn't mean things are going to be exactly the same when something significant happens, but it does tell us that we have pretty ingrained patterns. And those patterns are there not just because we've been doing them forever, because we like them and we gain value from them. And employers recognize that and employees recognize that. And the office recovery is a wonderful sign of, and the current state of the office, by the way, that in some cases, we can have our cake and eat it too. So we can go back to the office less, but still keep the office as a center point for where business runs.
Yeah, good point. And I think another benefit that's come out of this is the office environment for most companies is better, right? They understand that let's make it a place you want to go. It's like wellness factors and amenities and culture and all of that, right?
And engagement.
Engagement.
You know that the day, if you're going into the office 2-3 days a week, and you know you're going to have a day tomorrow where, look, I don't have to do as many in-person meetings. I can get some of the stuff done I need to get done. You're more likely to stand there and develop that relationship more, invest more time in coaching, invest more time in engaging with employees to collaborate on problem solving. So I think it helps us focus the office on what the office does best. And by the way, I don't want to go on a crazy tangent, that might be the most important thing. Hybrid work is at its best if we maximize work from home for the things that work from home is ideally suited for, and we maximize the office for the things the office is ideally suited for. And so if we can lean into that potential, then you really significantly raise the ceiling on the positives of hybrid work.
Yeah, and good point. And I liked your point earlier about depending on really what you do and your company does and what you do at your company. I was shooting pool in our office. We have a game room. I was shooting pool with one of my brokers after hours, and he'd been in business about 12, 14 years. And so he had a deal fall through that day. And as we're just shooting pool, hanging out, talking, he told me about it and asked some questions, gave him some ideas. He stopped the game mid-game. I said, I can use that. I can put this deal. He went to his office, put the deal back together, and came back in 10 minutes later and said, oh my gosh, if I hadn't have been here with you, I wouldn't even known that. He didn't know to talk to me either, because our brokers, once we've been in the business 3 or 4 years, we know everything. And so we don't get help. We don't train anymore. So.
That's amazing. I mean, that's the perfect story. That like really encapsulates what human interaction does in the workplace.
That's right. Well, Ethan, thanks for joining us, sir. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a pleasure.
All right. And thank you for joining us around the country. Check out Placer.ai for more information on what they do. And check out CREshow.com if you'd like to look at other show videos, podcasts, if you'd like to get an email announcing the show topic each week so you don't miss a show of special interest to you. We invite you to connect with us on your social media. And if you appreciate the show, hey, if you can give back to us, just forward the show to someone or post it on social media. We'll appreciate it. And until next week, be sure that you always lead, learn, and laugh, and join us for America's Commercial Real Estate Show. America's Commercial Real Estate Show is brought to you by Bull Realty, commercial real estate sales, leasing, and advisory services. Visit bullrealty.com or reach out to me directly. My email is michael@bullrealty.com. By Commercial Agent Success Strategies, 21 cloud-accessed agent training videos. Learn more at commercialagentsuccess.com. You're invited to subscribe to the show wherever you listen or watch the show. You're also invited to subscribe to a weekly email announcing the show topic and guests at CREshow.com. Thank you for watching, listening, and sharing America's Commercial Real Estate Show.